one more session for this stage, and that is a fireside chat with two rather profound individuals, one of which is Dr. Oliver Pabst, who's general partner at Redalpine. For you or in the audience who do not know who or what that is, well, it's one of Europe's most respected early-stage technology funds, so you actually should know who that is. And he is joined alongside Maximilian Nieremund, who is the CTO and co-founder of Lyceum. And I suppose if one had to put it into terms, you are building the infrastructure layer that puts serious compute within reach of every European deep tech builder in this room, or at least at this conference for sure. All right, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for the final speakers.
Good. So, not a very full room, so let's have a casual conversation here. So actually it's not Max joining me, I'm joining Max on his journey. So I would say we start with explaining what you really do. And maybe for better context, we have been investing into Lyceum beginning of 25. So we are roughly a year and a half in. Very happy with our investment, by the way. And we have been investing on the hypothesis to invest into, let's call it a European sovereign play cloud hyperscaler, not based on volume, more based on the software intelligence which Max and his team is bringing to the market. But you can explain much better.
I'll try. Hey, thanks for having me. Great to be here. So we founded Lyceum on the idea that everyone in Europe should be able to access a GPU, access high-performance compute, so the kind of stuff that NVIDIA builds, without any barriers and without any issues on the both technological, financial, and regulatory side. So essentially, how can anyone get onto a GPU, run critical AI workloads, without needing to know much about how a GPU works at all? So essentially, really remove that entry barrier.
When you have, I mean, I follow you in LinkedIn, so I saw 2 days ago that we have here our session, and you put it a couple words in a very short LinkedIn post, and you mentioned EU sovereignty, AI inference, and the current crazy in the GPU market. So tell us, what is so crazy about the market?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I went to GTC, the NVIDIA Developer Conference in San Jose, California, a month ago, roughly. And there was people there who'd been in the GPU industry for 20, 25 years. And they said they've never seen a time like today. So essentially, every single GPU on the market right now is sold out. If you want a GPU today, at at least somewhat reasonable price, no shot. It just doesn't work. And that's going to continue until the end of 27, because RAM, so one of the sort of memory components of a GPU, of a computer chip, is completely sold out for the next 2 years. It's basically companies like Google, it's like Elon buying all the available capacity, and there's nothing left for the normal consumer, literally nothing. So loads and loads of clouds basically completely stopped their on-demand offering. All they do now is offer 3-year terms. Essentially, you can reserve a GPU today, but for the next 3 years. So anything below that, you just can't do.
And how do you solve that problem yourself? Thank you. Thank you. So how do you solve that problem yourself?
Yeah, I think it's getting a bit technical, but I try to make light. So I think essentially the way GPU financing and availability of GPU has been done in the past is people fixed the financing around the product. So essentially, how can you finance a certain cluster? So you take a loan with a bank very classically, and then you also have to rent out the compute for that duration, because otherwise you're not covered. And so what we do is we actually turn it the other way around, and we believe that by being the only ones that essentially offer on-demand compute, so not lock someone in for 3 years, people are actually willing to pay a higher price because you get that flexibility. And that allows us to get really attractive financing terms because the returns are actually higher at high utilization, which you have today because there's no other GPUs out there.
And what is the impact on your margin?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's fantastic. I think the fact that everyone else is doing long-term and we can do short-term, and we can add software on top that makes short-term use more efficiently, but gets a bit too technical, is a massive multiplier for us.
Yeah. So current craziness in the market is one element of your LinkedIn post. The other one was EU sovereignty. So how do you look at the sovereignty play in Europe?
I mean, if you look at any cloud provider, and especially for inference, which is the one thing that people care about today, right? You have an AI model, you want to talk to it like how everyone in the room uses Claude, how everyone uses ChatGPT. There is no European alternative. There just isn't any. Every time you run something on your computer on an AI model, it'll go to the US. And if you just ask about a cooking recipe, that's probably fine. But if you move company internal data, that's not fine, right? Because that's exactly the type of information you probably want to keep private and secret, because it might be proprietary, right? It might be customer data, it might be your IP, your development. And that information currently just goes to the US. And why is everyone willing to send that data to the US? It's because there's no comparable alternative in Europe. It's you take such a downgrade in the quality of the product that you get by running workloads in Europe today on like large German telecom clouds, for example, that it's not worth it. I mean, the German military runs on Microsoft Azure. It's probably the most infrastructure critical thing we have, runs on an American cloud, right? Because would you rather send the information to the US or just have the whole system go down in times of need, right? That's the deal that people currently have to make. And that's what we want to change by building the best software in the world coming from Europe.
In your own go-to-market, is it playing a role already?
Yeah, so we do a lot of geo and SEO and that kind of stuff. And so the two largest drivers are cost and product or feature maturity. But then closely behind that is EU sovereignty. So it's one of the top 3 things that people find us for.
Can you share a bit? I mean, we have been discussing before we met today already how your business works. I mean, if I understand right, you use open source models. Or you can explain better. So let's start how it works really.
So there is 2 reasons customers come to us. Either they want to just get a GPU. They want a bare metal or VM machine, so essentially just run something on a GPU. They set up everything themselves, and they come to us because we're the only place where they can find GPUs. The other reason is EU sovereign AI inference. So what we just talked about, I want to run AI inference at scale. So like a very classical case is my company spends 5 million a year on AI with Claude. If I go to Lyceum, I can cut my cost by a factor of 20 to 30 because open source models are that much cheaper. And I get 93, 95% of the performance, for coding sometimes even higher. So you get a very, very, very minor degradation in performance, which often you can just recoup by prompting the model twice instead of once, by the way. And all your data stays in Europe, and you save a ton of money. So that's the 2 reasons people come to us today.
Yeah, and I think that's very impressive. If you just reminding ourselves what you just said, having a quality level of 94, 95% of a Claude or an Anthropic model or OpenAI model versus an open source, obviously Chinese model for the fraction of a cost. It's very interesting. And I learned, by the way, which I was quite impressed that at Charité as well, they use open source Chinese model on premise to feed it with German patient data. Yeah? So there's a lot around as well saving costs in that play, and even for a quality level which is definitely sufficient enough. Let's go a bit back to your own journey and how you built the company. What are let's say 2, 3 milestones over the last couple of years, or let's say 2 years, and what are the milestones you see ahead?
Yeah, so I think for us, the first really big milestone was raising our pre-seed round. And I think at the time it was the largest pre-seed round that ever was raised in Europe, thanks to you guys. And I think it's what was needed, because the space we're in, everyone we compete with has hundreds of billions of dollars at their disposal, right? AWS, GCP, Azure, all these guys, they swim in money. So for us, the only way to compete was to be quite bold when we started. So essentially we had a really, really good team. We had fantastic guys from the start that wanted to build this with us. But it's not the kind of thing where you can raise like 1-2 million and then see how far you get. But the upfront investments, also because it's the GPU space, GPUs are really, really expensive. It was really important to essentially either we can raise a really big round or we just can't do the thing at all. And then luckily we managed to raise a really big round. And I think kudos to you guys for also supporting something like this, where everyone says, yeah, you can't raise a 10 million pre-seed round in Germany. It only works in the US. It's not true. Like, you guys showed us that it works. And I think that's a really, really strong signal. And I think that's what Europe needs more of. And I think we're seeing it getting a bit better. And I think, yeah, it's great for us that we managed to pull this off quite early on. So that's the first big milestone.
By the way, you did an amazing pitch.
Well,
based on that, we had to put down.
So all my co-founder, I was just sitting there.
Not true.
So, and then, yeah, I think the second big milestone was when we first deployed our first own hardware. So we own GPUs because, as we mentioned before, if there's no GPUs available, I can't offer my product. So we bought GPUs, we put them in a data center in Paris. We operate them, they're 100% utilization, everything's great, but that was such a big learning experience because honestly, everything that could go wrong with deploying these GPUs went wrong. It was nightmare. It was like days of not sleeping and driving to Paris and connecting liquid cooling and shouting at people that drove the truck to the wrong data center and all that kind of stuff. But once we had it done, it was a massive achievement. Also, I think those moments are really, really important for the team actually, because that's when you see, hey, we're not just something on paper, but we're a company that owns these GPUs. You can touch them, they look incredible. Like, I love being in data centers. And I think that's really motivating to the team as well to see, hey, look, this is ours, guys. This is what you did with your work and what you facilitated with your work. Yeah, so I think that was the second one. And then third, and I think really important one was quite recently when we launched our serverless AI inference offering. So now everyone can speak to any open source model via us, token-based billing. I said before, 30 times cheaper than Claude. And within like the first 1 to 2 days, we already sold like 100 million tokens or something crazy because the need for this product was so large. And I think, again, it's nice for us and we can tell investors and everyone's happy. But I think the real enabler is, again, going to the team and saying, hey, look, guys, you built this. And now this is the actual impact of what you're doing. And this is how much people love your product. And I think that's a really, really great moment for us as a company.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I mean, besides the efficiency and the pricing you offer, I think as well let's call it the user experience you're offering is outstanding. That's why I think you have that success as well. So looking forward, now we have been speaking about 3 milestones. Looking forward in the past, looking forward, what are the next steps in the development of the company? And as well as the organizations, share a bit with us what is as well troubles you, where you might see not only, where could be as well a roadblock.
Yeah, so I think the 2 things that keep me up right now are 1, hiring and team growth, and 2, our GPU supply. So I think it's always the same points, which is good for us because we just have to focus on like 1 or 2 things and everything else I can ignore. Hiring, we compete with companies that. So I spoke to this guy who's at AWS in S3, which is AWS's storage unit, in one of the 2 observability teams, and this team is bigger than my company. So for like the tiniest task of a sub-product of one of our competitors, they have more people than we have in total to do not everything. We think they do a lot of stuff you don't have to do, but we need to get a lot more people on board, which we have 17 open roles. So if you guys know any great systems engineers, do send them our way. So that's the one thing. And then the other thing is the supply. And I think it's probably one of the best problems to have, but it still stresses me out loads, is we have too much demand for the supply we have. So all our GPUs are 100% utilization. Everything's great, but we get so much inbound demand for GPUs and inference that we can't serve them. And that's also kind of a shit feeling, because you go a bit like, are we moving too slowly? Are we not? How can we ramp up capacity more quickly? Are these customers just going to go away, go somewhere else because we can't deliver? So it still stresses me out a lot, even though everyone says it's a good problem, but when you have that problem, you don't care about whether it's a good problem or not, it's just a problem. And yeah, that's one of the things we need to get really creative about, and that we're taking first steps now.
I mean, that is obviously a challenge for a lot of players in the market to get enough capacity. When you speak about getting creative about it, and anything what you can share?
Yeah, so the one approach that we've taken now that actually seems to be working well, fingers crossed, is we work a lot with family offices from across Europe, and they buy GPUs from their equity, so we don't have to worry about the financing, and they give us those GPUs to manage. So we pretend like they are our GPUs, but they're not. We give some rate of return to those family offices, and in return we get to have supply. We can offer these GPUs to our customers, and yeah, we obviously also make some money off that. But so we solve the supply problem, we increase our revenue, and I think it's a nice side effect. We don't become a super asset heavy, very infra-focused company, because at the end of the day, we're still a software company, and we just buy GPUs because you can't use our product without GPUs. But from a sort of investable/investment perspective, it's not necessarily desirable to be the company that has like the heaviest balance sheet in the world. So that's, I think, the solution we running now, and I think it works.
That's cool. I mean, this is a more or less a finance problem, but you have been as well speaking about just getting GPUs. Is there any creative idea you would like to spark here or share or not? I mean, no need. I mean, I was just wondering, because might be of interest.
Yeah, so look, I think the main access issue is the financing issue today, because there's a lot of people going around saying, hey, I buy some GPUs, I do whatever, but like not a lot of these people actually deliver. And so the critical thing is to get a financing provider, like a large asset manager, private equity firm, to deploy money in your solution. And I think that's where we had to be creative on how we actually structure the financing. On getting access to the GPUs, I meet at least one person from NVIDIA every week. They're very, very good at sort of keeping their network closed, and they're very friendly with you when you buy their GPUs. And so I think as long as you establish good relationships with them, I think access is actually okay right now. I think that's sort of being portrayed in the media slightly too controversially. Like, if I want a couple thousand GPUs, I can get them within less than half a year.
Yeah. Maybe it's of interest. I found it at least very interesting. I just read that in 10 out of the states in the US, there have been citizens going against building data warehouses close to their villages or cities or whatever, because the grid is so weak, and they are afraid of that the data centers more or less taking energy out of the grid, or the grid is breaking down. So it is kind of an anti-data warehouse movement across the US. And why do I speak about? Because at the same time we see those billions of US dollars going into building data warehouses. We as well hear about that what actually is committed can't be deployed. One out of the reason I just mentioned, but as well out of other reasons. Is there any opportunity you see for Europe to, because of a better infrastructure, whatever, that we can close that gap over the course of the years?
I think so. And I think this is actually one of our hypotheses, and has been from the start, is I think Europe, in things like oil, for example, we have a geostrategic disadvantage, right? There just isn't as much oil in our soil here. But for data centers, that's not really true, because the main issue for building new data centers is power, so grid connectivity. And what we actually have a lot of in Europe is old industrial sites. And what all these industrial sites have is a ton of potential power. And that is, I think, why Europe actually has a huge opportunity to own the data center space much more. We then get into issues like energy prices, for example, which are much lower in the US, which makes quite a big difference if you run at gigawatts of power. But that's really the biggest enabler.
The infrastructure is there, huh? The grid is stronger. When we invested, I remember in the IC, we have been discussing the first data center you want to build in close to Copenhagen. Huh? Now you went to Paris. After speaking about the US, now looking at Europe, where does it make most sense to build data centers, respectively building out your own infrastructure?
So Nordics are still very good. I mean, it's cold there, which helps with the cooling. They have reasonably good electricity prices, and they have a pretty stable grid. Spain, we are deploying a bunch of GPUs now, because I think the government there is actually quite data center friendly, and there's tons of initiatives on getting data centers built in Spain. Germany, unfortunately, is quite difficult because it's very expensive on the electricity side, and permits are super difficult to get. So I think South and North Europe are usually quite good. We have a couple partners in Eastern Europe, in Poland, Czech Republic, where we have GPUs. But infrastructure there, I think, is not quite there yet on the build-out of data centers.
Yeah. So thank you for bearing with us. So I open the floor now for you guys in case you have any questions. I think it's a very, very interesting company, a lot to learn for founders, but as well for people who want to deploy money. So any questions you might have on top of your mind here? Joachim? I think we are such a small room, you might stand up and just... Hallo, grüß dich.
Hi. So I got two questions. The first one is, and that's my personal perspective, right now there's so much funding going into the data centers in the States. And if we listen to what Dario, for example, says himself, if I quote correctly, he said, well, the underlying financial models for those infrastructure projects, which are also not on the balance sheet of the hyperscalers, they're outsourced and paid for by pension funds and so forth. They rely on an 8-fold of revenue year over year, a 10-fold. And he said, if it's just an 8-fold, which is still amazing, 8-folding, the financial model breaks. I mean, that scares me, right? Because if that breaks, we have like a subprime crisis 2.0. It's not houses that get lost by basically pension funds and all of that stuff. So my question is, even though you're very bullish, both, and that's good, does this keep you awake at night? That's the first question. And the second question is, also when we look at panels here about like the projection of future energy use, the energy supply just won't keep up with the projected growth, right? Where do you see Germany's, Europe's, potential in terms of, photonic chips as a solution for that? And are you already working in that direction and so forth? Thanks.
Thanks. Okay, so I think first question, on that I actually sleep like a baby. I have many issues, but that's not one. So I'm not 8, 10, I'm not sure about the numbers, but I think two numbers to underline why I'm happy. The first one is the global use of tokens in AI inference, essentially almost like words that are sent to models and back, since December has grown from 6 million a minute to 13 billion a minute, a 2,000x increase in the amount of AI compute used. So much for, and why should this be the limit, right? Most of the companies don't use AI yet in the way they should be. Second point is, if you look at an 8100 GPU, so 6-year-old GPU, today goes for the exact same hourly price as it did 6 years ago. So this GPU returns money. We did the maths for some of our family office conversations. I think if you had bought an A100 back then and just ran it at some reasonable utilization, you'd return your money something in the area of the numbers that you mentioned, which is completely insane, right? Like, which investment has like a 400%, 500%, 600% return? Completely insane. That's on the first question. Second question, I think the solution, chips might be the solution, but that's really long term because you have to adapt a ton of software. I mean, the reason everyone uses NVIDIA, it's not because they're really good GPUs, but it's because of their ecosystem on CUDA and the whole software stack. I think the solution is actually much more alternative sources of energy. So, I mean, you guys have probably one of the most exciting energy companies in the world with Proxima in your portfolio. And Martin and I, their CTO, we go running a lot together. And I think that's the solution. I mean, Google now builds nuclear power plants next to their data centers. I think the solution is not changing the chip. I think the solution is to massively increase energy supply.
Yeah, and maybe just to double down on what you say, I mean, as a VC, we look at the complete stack of AI to simplify from energy to the layers. And I think we find in all those levels, we find opportunities to optimize the stack. Yeah. In general, I'm absolutely with you. Energy is the biggest challenge. That's why we actually have been investing in Proxima and as well trying to look into in the next step to as well support the supply chain for nuclear fusion.
Hi guys, a completely different question here.
Smart about building their ecosystem and so on, that I think even if it's a lot better, it's going to take very, very long for that product to be adopted in the market. And I think also, given sort of the capex you have and sort of what data centers are built now, there is no quick fix. For the next 10 years, it's not going to change.
So basically what you're saying is the CUDA interfacing and that kind of part of the ecosystem is protecting NVIDIA much more than the computer architecture itself.
Yeah, so I mean, the computer architecture is also really good, and I think like, get into detail, but they bought this company called Mellanox, which means their networking is 2 years ahead of everyone else, which means you can move stuff faster around from CPU to GPU, and that's all fantastic. But I think if any other company had that without the software stack, it wouldn't matter.
Thanks.